In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev launched one of the most ambitious anti-alcohol campaigns in modern history. Across the Soviet Union, vineyards that had stood for more than a century were torn from the ground. Vodka production fell to a fraction of its former level. Stores shortened their selling hours. Entire regions with generations of winemaking tradition watched bulldozers destroy the vines that had supported their families for decades. Over the next several years, the Soviet budget lost tens of billions of rubles. At a time when oil prices were collapsing and the economy was already weakening, the loss was devastating. Many historians believe it became one of the forces that accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev wanted to break his country's dependence on vodka. Instead, he weakened the state that had depended on vodka for centuries. But that was only the end of one chapter. Long before Gorbachev, Ivan the Terrible had created state-run taverns, not because he loved drinking, but because a monopoly on vodka gave him money for war without forcing him to beg the nobility for funds. Peter the Great used vodka as part of the wages paid to the laborers who built St. Petersburg. In the 1930s, the Soviet government deliberately expanded alcohol production after realizing that a population numbed by drink was easier to manage. And even today, Poland, Russia, and Sweden continue to argue over vodka's identity, origin, and ownership. So how did a liquid that began as medicine in monastic apothecaries become one of the most important financial instruments in European history? Why did rulers use it to fund armies, build cities, and control populations? And how could the attempt to remove it help destabilize one of the most powerful states on earth? The history of vodka does not begin at a dinner table. It begins in an apothecary. The water of life. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Arab alchemists refined the technique of distillation. Over time, that knowledge traveled into Europe, often through monasteries and medical centers. In Poland and the lands of Rus, monks applied distillation to fermented grain. Rye, wheat, barley. The liquid they produced carried different names in different places. Bread wine, horilka, okavita, aqua vitae, the water of life. At first, this was not a drink for celebration. It was medicine. It was used as an antiseptic for wounds, as a painkiller, as a remedy for colds, stomach problems, and aching joints. It was expensive to produce, made in small quantities, and available mainly to monks, healers, clergy, and members of the nobility. Written references appear in both Polish and Russian sources during the late medieval period. Those documents later became the foundation of a dispute that has never entirely disappeared. Poland says vodka is Polish. Russia says vodka is Russian. Sweden occasionally enters the conversation with a history of its own. The argument has lasted for centuries. But in the 15th and 16th centuries, the question of national ownership mattered far less than one simple fact. Vodka was still medicine. It had not yet become a mass-market drink. That changed when the state discovered how much money it could make. Ivan the Terrible and the First Vodka State. Ivan IV ruled Russia from 1547 to 1584. History remembers him as Ivan the Terrible. He was politically gifted, deeply paranoid, ruthless, and almost constantly at war. The conquest of Kazan, the Livonian War, the Oprichnina. Every campaign consumed enormous amounts of money. Soldiers had to be paid. Weapons had to be made. Fortresses had to be supplied. The treasury was always under pressure. Ivan needed a source of income that was predictable, immediate, and difficult for the nobility to control. Vodka offered exactly that. During the 1550s, Ivan began building a system of state-run taverns known as kabaks. One of the earliest royal kabaks opened in Moscow shortly after the conquest of Kazan. The timing was not accidental. Another war required money. Private vodka sales were restricted. Unauthorized production was prohibited. The state sought control over the entire trade, from grain to glass. It was a brilliant system. and a brutal one. Vodka revenue did not depend on foreign trade. It did not depend on diplomacy. It did not disappear during bad harvests, war, or social unrest. People drank when times were good. They drank when times were bad. They drank in peace. And they drank in famine. Few sources of government revenue were as reliable. By the end of the 16th century, alcohol sales had become one of the most important sources of state income in Russia. One clear liquid was helping support an empire. The kabaks were designed to extract as much money as possible. Food was often unavailable. Only alcohol was sold. Customers were expected to finish what they purchased. Tavern operators were given sales targets and encouraged to push consumption. The contradiction was extraordinary. The government publicly claimed to defend morality. At the same time, it created a system that encouraged drunkenness because a drunk subject generated more revenue than a sober one. And, just as importantly, a drunk subject asked fewer questions. The structure Ivan created did not disappear with him. It survived changes of ruler, changes of dynasty, changes of ideology. In one form or another, the connection between vodka and state power continued for centuries. Peter the Great builds with vodka. A century later, Peter the Great took that relationship even further. Peter came to power in 1682. He spent the rest of his life building, reforming, fighting, and spending money on a scale that shocked even his closest advisors. He wanted a modern army, a navy, a new capital, a European-style court. He ordered noblemen to wear Western clothing. He demanded clean-shaven faces instead of traditional Russian beards. And when many refused, he taxed the beard itself. It sounds like a joke. It was not. Noblemen and merchants who wanted to keep their beards paid an annual fee. They carried special tokens proving the tax had been paid. Even peasants could be charged for entering a city with a beard. The money went to the treasury. The treasury financed war and construction. But taxes alone were not enough. Vodka remained one of the state's most dependable resources. Nowhere was that more visible than in the construction of St. Petersburg. Peter wanted a new capital facing Europe. He chose a marshy region near the Baltic Sea. The land was wet, cold, disease-ridden, and almost impossible to build upon. Thousands of laborers dug canals, moved stone, drove wooden supports into the mud, and laid the foundations of palaces. Many died from disease, exhaustion, hunger, and exposure. Part of the project was financed through alcohol revenue, and some workers received vodka as part of their wages. This was not generosity. Russia's money economy was still underdeveloped. Vodka was widely accepted, easily traded, and understood almost everywhere. It functioned like liquid currency. Peter's soldiers also received official vodka rations. The stated reason was practical. Vodka was believed to keep men warm in Russia's brutal climate. It raised morale. It helped soldiers endure long marches and nights in the field. But it also served another purpose. An army is a large body of armed men. Keeping that body dependent on supplies controlled by the state made it easier to manage. At the Battle of Poltava in 1709, Peter's forces defeated the Swedish army of Charles XII. It became one of the greatest victories in Russian history. And the soldiers who fought that battle marched with their government-issued vodka ration. Peter used vodka to finance his state. He used it to reward workers. He used it to sustain armies. And in the end, years of heavy drinking likely damaged his own health. He died in 1725 after years of physical decline. The ruler who treated vodka as an instrument of empire may also have become one of its victims. The monopoly he expanded lived on long after him. A new regime, the same old system. By the 20th century, Russia had a different government. The Tsars were gone. The monarchy had collapsed. The Soviet Union promised to build an entirely new society. But when it came to vodka, the new state inherited the logic of the old one. During the 1930s, the Soviet Union was moving through collectivization, dekulakization, forced industrialization, and the first 5-year plans. Millions were hungry. Workers were exhausted. Peasants were being uprooted. Fear touched every part of daily life. Public anger was enormous. Expressing that anger was dangerous. At that moment, the Soviet leadership made a calculated decision. Vodka production expanded. Prices were kept within reach of ordinary workers. The number of state liquor stores increased. This was not simply consumer demand. It was policy. The logic was cold. A person who drinks heavily is less likely to organize resistance. Money spent on vodka is money not used to build independence. A citizen who depends on state alcohol depends, in some measure, on the state itself. A government that controls the easiest available form of escape controls more than a market. It controls a habit. It controls a weakness. It controls relief. A famous quotation is often attributed to Stalin, claiming that vodka was not merely a drink but an instrument for governing the masses. The exact wording has never been conclusively verified. But the policies require no quotation. The system speaks for itself. During the 1930s and 40s, alcohol revenues became a major part of the Soviet budget. The proportions were strikingly similar to those seen under earlier Russian rulers. The ideology had changed. The mechanism had not. Under Khrushchev and later Brezhnev, the system continued. Vodka remained relatively affordable. Government stores selling alcohol operated across Soviet cities. Lines formed outside them. Friday mornings became especially familiar. People stood waiting for the same state that promised a new communist future to sell them the drink that helped them forget the present. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was producing roughly 2 billion liters of vodka each year. Consumption was among the highest in the world. Male life expectancy was falling. Workplace accidents linked to alcohol were increasing. Productivity was declining. The state had created a source of income so successful that it had become a social disaster. Now that disaster was threatening the state itself. Gorbachev tries to break the cycle. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of the Communist Party. He looked at Soviet society and saw a country being damaged by alcohol. Workers were missing shifts. Families were breaking apart. Health indicators were deteriorating. Accidents were rising. The problem could no longer be ignored. In May of that year, the government launched a major campaign against drunkenness and alcoholism. Vodka production was cut dramatically. The hours during which alcohol could be sold were restricted. Prices rose. Stores faced tighter controls. In regions with ancient winemaking traditions, vineyards were destroyed. Georgia, Moldova, Crimea. Some vines had been growing for 50 years. Others for 100. News footage showed tractors and bulldozers tearing through vineyards that had survived revolutions, wars, and generations of political change. Winemakers watched entire family traditions disappear. Some wept openly. The campaign produced real benefits. Alcohol consumption fell. Alcohol-related deaths declined. Birth rates rose. Health indicators improved. Those results were genuine. But the financial consequences were catastrophic. For centuries, Russian governments had built their budgets around alcohol. The Soviet Union was no exception. When vodka sales collapsed, so did a major stream of government revenue. At the same time, world oil prices were falling. The state lost tens of billions of rubles. It borrowed money. It cut spending. It loosened controls. The economic pressure created space for glasnost and perestroika. But it also weakened the government's ability to hold the union together. Movements for greater independence grew stronger. Regional tensions intensified. By 1991, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. Historians still debate how large a role the anti-alcohol campaign played. It was not the only cause of the collapse. Far from it. But the central fact remains difficult to ignore. A state that had depended on alcohol revenue for centuries could not suddenly remove that revenue without creating a replacement. Ivan the Terrible understood how useful vodka was to a government. Gorbachev understood how destructive it was to a society. What he did not fully solve was how to separate the state from the system without destabilizing both. When prohibition creates something worse, Soviet citizens reacted to restriction in the same way populations have often reacted to prohibition. They found alternatives. Home distilling exploded. Sugar disappeared from store shelves because people bought it to make homemade alcohol. Cologne was consumed. Industrial spirits were consumed. Any liquid containing alcohol became a possible substitute. Poisonings increased. The state discovered a painful truth. Removing legal vodka did not remove the demand for intoxication. It pushed that demand into more dangerous forms. The government had spent decades helping create dependence. It could not erase that dependence with one decree. Gorbachev's campaign did not fail because freedom was weaker than vodka. It failed because the state tried to remove one of its oldest systems without building a new system beneath it. A government financed by vodka cannot simply stop selling vodka. It must first become a government financed by something else. The Soviet Union never completed that transformation. The Mendeleev myth. There is one story about vodka that almost everyone in the Russian-speaking world has heard. According to legend, the great chemist Dmitry Mendeleev scientifically proved that the ideal strength of vodka is 40% alcohol. The claim says he reached that conclusion in his 1865 doctoral dissertation. That, supposedly, is why Russian vodka has traditionally been bottled at 40%. It is a wonderful story. It sounds scientific. It sounds patriotic. And it is not true. Mendeleev's dissertation examined the combination of alcohol and water. He studied the physical and chemical properties of ethanol-water mixtures at different concentrations. He was interested in density, volume, and the behavior of solutions. He did not recommend an ideal strength for vodka. He did not declare 40% to be perfect. His research was important, but it was not a guide to making the national drink. The 40% standard was formalized by Russian excise law in the late 19th century. It reflected common production practices and offered the government a convenient number for taxation. The Mendeleev legend appeared later. Most likely, it survived because it was simply too satisfying to abandon. A great scientist. A national drink. A precise number. A scientific blessing for a cultural habit. Who would not want to believe it? The story reveals something important. Vodka became so deeply woven into identity that an entire mythology grew around it. Some stories were true. Some were exaggerated. Some were beautiful inventions. And the boundary between history and legend became difficult to see. Wisho invented vodka. Poland claims vodka. Russia claims vodka. Both present documents. Both challenge the other side's evidence. Both employ historians willing to defend their version of the past. In the 1970s, the Soviet Union sought formal international recognition of vodka as a Russian invention. The goal was not merely pride. It was legal and commercial protection. Champagne is connected to a region. Cognac is connected to a region. Why should vodka not receive the same treatment? Poland responded immediately. It filed its own claim. Negotiations continued. No final answer emerged. In 2013, the European Union registered Polska Wodka as a protected geographical indication. That means vodka labeled as Polish vodka must meet specific conditions and be produced in Poland using approved Polish ingredients. Russia was not pleased. But the larger historical dispute remained unresolved. Sweden occupies a different position. The Swedish vodka industry rarely insists that Sweden invented the drink. Instead, it produces vodka and sells it around the world. Absolut, one of the largest vodka brands on earth, has been associated with the Swedish town of Aarhus since the 19th century. Perhaps that is the smartest strategy. Do not spend forever arguing about who owned the past. Build a brand that owns the present. Grey Goose and the invention of luxury vodka. In 1997, an American entrepreneur named Sidney Frank launched Grey Goose. Frank was already 75 years old. He was known for importing Jägermeister into the United States. But his vodka idea was different. Grey Goose would be produced in Cognac, France. That location was not chosen because France had the strongest historical claim to vodka. It was chosen because the words "made in France" sounded luxurious. Frank positioned the product as ultra-premium from the beginning. Advertisements appeared in magazines read by wealthy consumers. The bottle looked elegant. The story emphasized quality, refinement, and French craftsmanship. The price was set far above many competitors. Not necessarily because the liquid was vastly more expensive to make, but because price itself communicates status. Before Grey Goose, vodka was usually treated as an inexpensive neutral spirit. Colorless, nearly odorless, designed to disappear into a cocktail. Its value came from purity, strength, and affordability. So why would anyone pay twice as much for a spirit designed not to stand out? Sidney Frank changed the question. The question was no longer, "What does this vodka taste like?" It became, "What does ordering this vodka say about you?" Grey Goose became a status symbol, a luxury signal, a way to display identity at the bar. People were not only purchasing alcohol, they were purchasing an image. In 2004, Sidney Frank sold Grey Goose to Bacardi for roughly $2 billion. He had invested only a fraction of that amount in building the brand. It became one of the most successful examples of creating luxury value through marketing. Today, vodka can sell for $5 a bottle, or $500. The chemical differences are often far smaller than the price differences. Packaging, story, status, scarcity, identity. Those are the ingredients that create luxury. Ivan the Terrible built a monopoly by controlling supply. Sidney Frank built one of the world's most valuable vodka brands by controlling perception. The methods were different. The understanding of human behavior was remarkably similar. Vodka as control and vodka as resistance. The history of vodka is the history of governments using dependence. Ivan the Terrible created a monopoly that helped finance war. Peter the Great used vodka as revenue, military supply, and currency. The Soviet government expanded production when it needed money and a more manageable population. When Gorbachev tried to break that relationship, the state discovered how deeply the system had become embedded. But vodka was not only a tool of government, it was also a tool of resistance. Home distilling was illegal under nearly every regime, and under nearly every regime it continued. Villagers produced their own spirits. Families built hidden stills. Communities exchanged alcohol outside official channels. The same people the state tried to control through vodka sometimes escaped that control by making vodka themselves. It was not a revolution. It did not overthrow governments, but it represented a repeated refusal to surrender every part of daily life to the state. The official bottle belonged to the monopoly. The homemade bottle belonged to the household. History rarely records such victories, but they happened constantly. The modern vodka empire. Today, the global vodka market is worth tens of billions of dollars. Russia remains one of the world's largest consumers. Poland is one of its most important exporters. Sweden sells Absolut in more than 140 countries. Grey Goose is produced in France and marketed as a symbol of international luxury. Vodka brands compete through bottle shape, origin stories, celebrity partnerships, purity claims, and cultural identity. The liquid is clear. The marketing is not. Almost no one opening a bottle thinks about Ivan the Terrible, or state taverns, or Peter the Great's laborers, or Soviet budget policy. Yet the connection between vodka, money, and power never disappeared. It simply became harder to see. That may be the most important lesson. The strongest systems of control are often the ones that feel ordinary. A product sits on a shelf. A person buys it. Money changes hands. Nothing appears political. But the history beneath the transaction can stretch back centuries. From monastic medicine to designer bottle, vodka began as a monastic remedy for wounds and aching joints. Over 5 centuries, it traveled from monastery shelves to royal taverns. From royal taverns to the imperial treasury. From the imperial treasury to the swamps where St. Petersburg was built. From soldiers' rations to Soviet liquor stores. From village moonshine to designer bottles in luxury bars. Governments that tried to ban it often failed. Governments that taxed it grew rich. Governments that depended on it became trapped by their own dependence. And the people who drank it often paid a price they did not fully understand. Ivan the Terrible recognized that alcohol could fund an empire. Peter the Great recognized that it could function as currency. Soviet officials recognized that it could numb a population. Gorbachev recognized that it was destroying society. Sidney Frank recognized that people do not merely buy a drink. They buy what the drink allows them to say about themselves. Mendeleev never declared 40% perfect. But the myth survived because people wanted science to confirm culture. Poland and Russia still argue over who created vodka. Sweden quietly sells it. France transformed it into luxury. And consumers around the world continue to pour the same clear spirit from bottles priced anywhere between a few dollars and several hundred. Vodka is transparent. Its history is not. The real lesson. The story of vodka is not really about alcohol. It is about power, money, status, dependence, control, resistance. It is about how governments can turn human weakness into revenue, how marketers can turn neutrality into luxury, how myths can become stronger than facts, and how easily people consume without asking what created the thing in front of them. For centuries, vodka reflected the society around it. Under the Tsars, it reflected imperial ambition. Under the Soviet state, it reflected control and economic dependence. In the modern market, it reflects identity, image, and status. The bottle changes. The meaning changes. The liquid remains clear. That is the real lesson of vodka's history. It is not only about what people drink. It is about what their governments, their cultures, and their desires pour into the glass. Not bad for a monastic remedy for aching joints that no one ever intended to become an instrument for governing empires.